Beyond Good and Evil's 20th Anniversary Edition is a near-perfect remaster for fans of the 2003 original. Visuals are improved over the previous HD release from 2011, with every texture, shader, and material upgraded with a new asset today. Current-gen consoles like PS5 and Xbox Series X also present the game at 4K resolution or 1440p on their performance modes, which I'll get to later, with each targeting 60 frames per second. It's a slick upgrade then that, thankfully, avoids straying too far from director Michel Ancel and his team's original vision. But it doesn't stop there. Developer Ubisoft also adds a generous dose of extras to the package here. A couple of hours of making of documents are crammed in, concept art, pre-release videos, even footage of removed levels and features. It's genuinely fascinating stuff, letting us see the evolution of the project through each E3 demo build. It's a great chance also for Ubisoft to mine through its vaults for a kind of deep dive into the game's history. For this bonus section alone, it might be worth the price of entry for the hardcore fan. On top of that though, we get a new speedrun mode, and most tantalizingly, content is added later in Beyond Good and Evil's adventure that links it to the long-awaited and elusive prequel project. For the initiated fan then, the 20th Anniversary Edition offers a wellspring of new information. It also gives us some much needed encouragement in Ubisoft's plans for a follow-up game, given that 16 years from its original announcement trailer, there's still no confirmed release date for Beyond Good and Evil 2. Also, just as crucially, this remaster gives newcomers a perfect way to jump in, to understand what made the original game so special. So, to the questions, how drastic are those visual improvements? Charting the upgrades from the 2003 original through to the 2011 HD version on Xbox 360 and PS3, up to today's 20th Anniversary Edition on modern consoles. Secondly, what's the state of the Nintendo Switch release? Does it keep a lion's share of those new visual features intact from PS5? And finally, what of the frame rate, especially on Switch, where a 30 FPS cap is in place? Let's find out. Without further ado, let's get into the upgrades themselves. For the original 2003 release on the far left, I'm showing the GameCube version, running at 480p. Of course, the game had a PS2, Xbox, and PC release as well, but this GameCube release represents the game well for its time. In the middle, it's the HD release from 2011, the Xbox 360 version in this case running on a Series X machine. This version had improved textures in spots and a res boost to 720p, but otherwise, most of its visuals are the same as the original. And finally, of course, there's the new and improved 20th Anniversary Edition on right. This is a much more substantial overhaul. It's running on PS5 in this case, which is identical to Series X in visual features and PC maxed out. The boosted resolution on console is a major factor to start. This 20th Anniversary Edition's resolution mode takes us to a crisp native 4K on PS5 and Series X, or a 9 times increase in pixels pushed over the previous HD release on console. In terms of sheer image clarity, the progression is pretty clear through each generation. From left to right, we have 480p going to 720p, and then right up to 4K today. The res boost is just one part of the package, of course. The revised HUD elements, the text, and the menus all get a sizable overhaul to suit the final output. But equally, the actual in-game assets also see a stark upgrade. Let's dial into just the previous HD release against the 20th Anniversary Edition here. Practically every texture is reworked with the newer pin-sharp version. The ground textures, the skybox filling the nighttime horizon with stars, these are all replaced. It seems some textures fall much closer to the original and HD versions in quality, and some elements potentially use an AI upscale to repurpose the original asset. Others, though, are clearly built from scratch, adding more complex shader effects, for example, that simply would not have been possible back in 2003. The result, on the whole, is effective in retaining the original design, albeit with a sharper, cleaner resolve to 4K. So a few highlights include this reporter's microphone, which gets a higher resolution mesh built around a new metallic shader. And later on we see character skin and clothing also get sizable upgrades. The design of Jade and even her sidekick, Paige, is a real standout. Note how there's new specular highlights across Paige's face in the 20th anniversary edition, where his new skin shader allows for a kind of glistening sheen under oncoming light. Likewise, these Rhino characters at the local garage sport a new, coarser skin material that completely changes their interaction with indoor lighting. It's great stuff, and this overhaul applies to Beyond Good and Evil's most significant characters. Their jackets, hats, and tops now reveal a more fabric-like effect in close-up, on Jade, Double H, and even the suits handing out missions. It's clear that their basic geometric design is broadly intact from the original, so it's often a pretty surface-level tweak, but a satisfying one. Even the Terra Lomax boss here is now upgraded with a scaly material up and down its body, where before we had a flatter coloured texture. On the whole, these changes just heighten the effect of the original intended design. It's also to Ubisoft's credit that it's dug deeper on the lesser known characters that more desperately needed a visual upgrade. Some parts, like these, simply would not have held up at 4K left untouched. So, the residents of the lighthouse, the first opening area, now actually have fingers, rather than simplified LEGO character style claws. Oddly enough, character expressions are also changed in the process, and this character seems to be rather enjoying their time being captured in the 20th anniversary release. Still, their geometry is visibly updated in a meaningful way, while in a similar vein the environments get subtle tweaks. This rug, for instance, now has crumples added to its design, and you'll spot a great many similar changes across Beyond Good and Evil's world. Needless to say, all of these upgrades apply to all console versions and PC. Usually I'd go super in depth on this, but being a remastered 20+ year old game, we're splitting hairs on the differences between PS5, Series X and S. The summary is, in short, all current gen consoles have a mode selection toggle between resolution mode and performance mode. Taking PS5 as an example, the resolution mode runs at a fixed 4K resolution and at 60 frames per second. The drawback being, well, that occasionally you'll spot these jarring lurches to 30 FPS. The game appears to use a double buffer VSync in effect, meaning any drop under 60 FPS will trigger the game to target 30 instead. It happens typically during a sudden burst of alpha effects, transparent effects, like this close-up of Paige using his rocket boots, or even this flyover across the Black Isle. At times, it's even a distraction to the gameplay itself. In this moment, for example, we're given the ability to fire projectiles at a boss, but the zoom function fills the frame with alpha effects, which essentially tumbles the frame rate. All of this happens on PS5 and Series X on that 4K resolution mode, but honestly, 99% of the time the experience is locked at 60. It's just these moments, these sudden points where we go from a 16 millisecond frame time down to 33 milliseconds in the blink of an eye. Where it happens, it really sticks out. Of course, there's a fix for PS5 and Series X. The performance mode essentially drops the pixel count to 1440p on each, where the upshot is fewer jarring drops. Taking PS5 in example again, this boss battle still has these small dips under 60 as we zoom into those alpha effects, but nothing quite on the level of that 4K resolution mode. It's overall less of a shock. Really, it's totally up to you which is a preference. Both modes on both PS5 and Series X will hit 60 FPS most of the time with zero issue. It's just whether you're okay to limit the impact of these drops by switching to 1440p. Meanwhile, looking at Series S running the 20th anniversary edition, the setup makes less sense here. I say that because you get 1440p on the resolution mode on Series S, so no 4K option here, which makes sense. But switching to the performance mode on Series S shows no difference in resolution in my testing. It's still 1440p regardless. all of which means, regardless of mode, you will have a 60fps experience typically, but it's again blighted by sudden nosedives in framerate in select spots. Again, we go down to 30fps during this taxi route from the top of the Black Isle, even on performance mode. And even during gameplay, it's possible while interacting with explosive crates. Unlike PS5 and Series X, there's currently no lower resolution option, even a 1080p option, to limit the impact of these drops on Series S. Next along, the Nintendo Switch version is a much more interesting and frustrating release by comparison, as is so often the case. The basics are, the game retains many of the features of the PS5 and Series X versions, but with select visual downgrades. On the upside first, Switch's resolution while docked goes between 900p and 1080p depending on the situation. Most dungeon areas trend towards that maximum 1080p figure, while the canal area at the centre of Hillies, with all the flying cars, turns out numbers closer to 900p. Also, while we're talking on resolutions, Switch in portable mode again typically has the game run at the maximum possible 720p. It's a perfect pixel match for the Switch display and looks crisp while playing on the go. Except comparing the game to, say, PS5 directly, there are notable cutbacks. Textures are a key point here, because for all the good work that goes into PS5, Series X and S's updated materials in the 20th anniversary edition for skin and clothes, Switch sadly misses out on a lot of benefits. In fairness, Switch does keep certain shader effects in place, but the overall resolution and definition of certain materials is clearly lowered. So taking that reporter's microphone again as an example, we see a huge downgrade here. And likewise, Paige's skin texture is dropped in resolution, though lighting interaction is still in line with PS5's at least. It's a mixed result on Switch all round, but most environmental textures are at least better than the HD version from 2011. We keep the improved geometry on minor characters' fingers, we keep that crumpled carpet in the lighthouse room, but elsewhere, Switch's smaller pool of 3.5GB of usable RAM necessitates a cut to texture and shader quality. I think one of the most stark differences is in reflections. Every reflected element in the water here runs at half the resolution of PS5, and by also removing the Gaussian blur effect across the water on Switch, the resulting stair-stepping sticks out. The final point then is on Switch's performance. We're looking at a 30fps cap here, which is disappointing given it's fundamentally such an old game. That said, it is an evenly frame-paced 30, which is a plus. The game also appears to prioritize the best resolution targets for the system, 1080p while docked and 720p while portable. The main issue then is that these targets might be too high, too demanding to carry the whole game at 30 on Switch. The game drops heavily under 30fps at select points, again with that double buffer style VSync logic that locks onto specific increments. So 20fps is possible, and even 12fps is a reality when stood in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alpha transparencies are the culprit again, just like PS5, and so stand under a waterfall, fill the frame with effects, and you'll see Switch's GPU is bottlenecked. The result being, in this case, a continuous 12fps reading. This is somewhat forcing the situation to show its worst case, of course, but you'll notice it enough during actual gameplay that it's worth flagging. Battles, for example, with too many enemies on screen, will at times bring the frame rate to the 20fps line. So, be warned. It's all very frustrating given that we've had releases of the game in the past, even the original Xbox or GameCube versions, which could run at 60fps at points. Thanks as ever to my colleague John Linneman for this direct capture of the game on original hardware. It shows that the game certainly wasn't always at 60fps, even on the most powerful console of that generation, but segments showed it hitting the mark. And so, today, you'd hope 2 decades on we'd have that ability on Switch, but alas, that's just not the case. That, in a nutshell, is how the 20th Anniversary Edition lines up on console today. Again, later, added content, which I won't spoil today, also bridges the game with Beyond Good and Evil 2. All of which makes it the most definitive and most convenient way to jump in today, if you haven't already. And really, I'm glad to see it, because as much as it's now celebrated as a cult classic, the sales for Beyond Good and Evil in 2003 didn't quite justify the follow-up. Back then, it was an ambitious multi-plat project for GameCube, Xbox and PS2, all built on the Jade engine. In a pre-Assassin's Creed world, it showed Ubisoft pushing the game as a kind of next-generation Zelda, with water physics, a dynamic time-of-day system, and a more open-world design. And it's surprising that so much of this holds up. Really then, the only snag to this release is in the scattering of bugs I've found so far. Mostly, this is limited to small gripes like flickering textures, but sadly, I have had one software lockup on selecting exit to menu. It's obviously easy to pick up from the last saved game from there with the autosave feature, but still, it's something to be wary of. All round, I'd still recommend this release though. Though it's worth bearing in mind the limitations in frame rate and visual quality on the Switch release. Looking to the future, it'll also be fascinating to see which clues in this release tie into Beyond Good and Evil 2. It has, after all, been 6 years since the last cinematic reveal shown at E3 2018, and so looking at the 20th anniversary edition today, we're given a small, rare glimpse into what might be happening behind the scenes at Ubisoft. But that's all from me today. If you did find this video useful or insightful in any way, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video and many more, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.